Hi, it's been a minute. Um, I don't know if you saw my post that I made, but I've been really busy. Like, really busy. So I haven't had a lot of time to sit down and get good clips or record anything. So I do want to say I'm sorry in advance for not having anything outside of like one short since my big Forsaken video. And, thanks for the Forsaken video. Of course, that is a massive, massive thing for me to go from more, to go from longer videos and even like my scripted videos not doing very well. Obviously, they don't get anything more than like a couple hundred views and like barely any discussion to like 22,000, I think, last I looked, and 400 comments is just insane. So I do want to say, like, thank you very much for that. That is a huge, huge thing for me to even, like, have that position to say I've done that, or even seen that from my own personal work. So, thank you, like, a lot for that. Obviously, I'm not going to be talking about Forsaken in this video, and if you saw my post, I'm probably not going to be talking about Forsaken until the new update comes out, whenever that comes out, so probably won't be seeing much in terms of Forsaken content for a little while, unless something really, really big ends up happening, but I just doubt it. So, same kind of goes for ASIM in general. There's plenty of videos out there already kind of explaining why ASIM's in a weird spot right now, so I'm not going to make a video on that. I was going to, but I think I've seen enough out there that my message on the state of the game, I guess you could put it, is just going to get washed out by everyone else's opinions and takes already. So I don't think it's worth your time, and I don't think it's worth my time talking about anything related to that, with like how ASIM is right now, with the Forsaken situations, with like how some of the other games right now are, like the Pillar Chase and the Recode and like Outcome Memories and its state right now, kind of getting ready for point 2 and all that. I just don't think it's really worth talking about because everyone else has already talked about it, right? I'm not here to waste your time, so I'm not going to do that. What I've actually been doing instead is a bigger-ish project, not really big project, but a project that I've been wanting to do, and it was going to be a lot bigger, but I kind of trimmed it down due to the release of some recent content between the Care Bear collab and the upcoming Halloween collab for Dandy's World. If you haven't seen some of my past content on here, I talk about the game, Dandy's World. I like it just about as much as I like ASIM Horror. I think it's a fantastic game for Roblox to have on its platform. So, with that being said, with the amount of hours I've put in the game, I have a lot of things I can say. Obviously, I'm not someone who's gone to like crazy record-breaking things. I haven't done anything like that. I will admit, I'm not that, dedicated. But I can say that I'm that passionate about what I do with this game. And so one thing I wanted to do is really gauge where this game is at right now, before, like, especially before these collabs came out and before the Halloween update comes out. I wanted to know where the game was, because I've heard a lot of talk, especially recently, regarding like Dandy's World is declining, the game is growing stale, the game is boring, blah blah blah. And to some of those statements, I'm not gonna deny that. Like, I do think the game is in a, I'm not gonna say a dire or desperate need, but it does need a shakeup. It does need something to make it interesting again, because it is kind of running on fumes at this point. And even with the like new machines and objectives and stuff, I just don't think they shift the game radically enough for players to come back at the rate that they used to, right? This game used to be pulling in hundreds of thousands, and now, like, I think I did see it hit 100,000 a couple days ago, but you don't see it as much as you used to. So I do think it is kind of at that point where we're going away from like the plateau of players, as I like to call it, and we're really starting to hit that decline, which I don't want to see, obviously. So, you know, this is a 5-minute yap session for me to say that I did some, I'm going to call it some basic research, because honestly, I do think I could have gone a little bit more in depth, and I'm going to in the future when I have more time to sit down and do so. But I did do some research on a couple different factors when it comes to the state of this game. More particularly, the players and the kind of general reception. So I'm just going to kind of talk about it the way I set it up, the way I performed my calculations, and how it turned out. So, first off, I want to talk about how I set this up. I played 15 games. I was going to do more, but especially with the release of the Care Bears thing, I knew that was going to shift my results pretty dramatically. So I did have to cut it to 15 instead of what I was planning to do, which was about 25 to 30. So I did 15 games, tried to get as many players as I could, so I got a total player count of 85 players within my 15 games. If you do your math, obviously, including me, that's about 6 players per game, like roughly, right? 5 2/3, but I tried my best to get as many players as I could. I think I only had one game that had a pretty low player count, but I still pushed through with it because, again, just trying to get those games in. So I got 85 players total, and I kind of gauged a variety of things. So I gauged what tune they were playing. I gauged what trinkets they were running. I kind of, like, where I could, because obviously some players aren't going to be chatting and whatnot, I tried to ask why. And then I set up my own ratings of 2 separate factors, being the average skill and the average toxicity. Because another thing I hear a lot with this particular game is toxicity, right? So I tried my best to gauge these 2 things. In game, I do want to specify that, especially, these were only in-game results. Obviously, trying to gauge outside the game is really, really hard to do, so I only did this in-game. When it comes to the skill factor, I based it on 2 different things. Number 1, the floor they made it to, right? So obviously farther floors, I gave them more points. Up to 3 points were considered for the floor. So at floor 5, 10, and 15, I gave 1 point for each. I also gave 1 point for if they were playing just well in general, right? Were they understanding when to hide, when to extract? Were they able to, you know, get out of chase as well? Were they using items, all that type of stuff? How quickly were they losing health? I determined that as a point. And then I also determined a point as, were they playing their character well? If they were a distractor, were they distracting well? If they were an extractor, were they doing machines, or were they just kind of dinking around doing whatever? If they were survivalists, were they doing well at not getting hurt, that kind of thing? So obviously I know that's a very subjective rating, but I will be refining this, especially as time goes on when I do this, not only for this game, but for other games as well. Toxicity I made a lot simpler. For every sort of toxic comment, I gave a point. That simple. So if they said 3 toxic things 3 separate times, they got 3 points. If they said something once, like just off whim, I gave them 1 point, you know? Because, like, I didn't want to punish people who were frustrated. I wanted to really hone in on those who were actively being toxic. So I only focused on, like, toxic comments, not, like, frustration. But if it was a toxic comment, for every toxic comment, I gave a point. The only exception was if it was, like, super, super, super toxic, like, borderline bannable offense, I gave multiple points there. But we'll get there. So those were kind of my general ratings, is character, trinkets, why they picked it, the average flora they made it, the average skill rating I gave them, and the average toxicity they got. So, again, across 15 games total, these, and I also want to specify one more thing before I get into the results. This was prior to the Care Bear collab, like a couple days prior, I believe. It was before the announcement was even made, but it was pretty long after Brusha had come out. So, just for reference, like, all of these games were quite a while after Brusha's release, so I tried to make it so that the release of a new tune wasn't a factor, or as large of a factor, but at the same time, it was before these characters got announced in the collaboration, so that way nothing was really influencing it that way, if that makes sense. Because obviously I knew if I was going to do it during this collaboration, it was going to be super skewed. It wasn't going to be an accurate display of the current state of the game. That's why I did that. So, with that being said, here were my results. First off, I want to talk about the characters, the tunes. The top 5 that I got in 5th place and in 4th place with a tie of 5 players was Cosmo and Yada. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Healers, obviously Cosmo is the easiest healer character to get into. Yada is a very great all-rounder character. I wasn't really surprised to see these two characters. Also, they're very popular fan base-wise, so these two characters being at 4 and 5 respectively are not that bad. Number 3 was actually, kind of to my shock, Brusha. Now, I do think part of it is still because even with how long I waited, it is still the most recent character to come out, and so obviously it's the most fresh character, but I'm still kind of surprised, to be honest, that this character is as high as it is, with 7 people out of the 85 players playing Brusha. Kind of shocking to me. And also, I want to specify, none of these numbers are from my, results, because I did consider my, calculations in here as well from how I played, but when it comes to, all these stats that I'm about to talk about, none of these are with me playing the game. If I had who I was playing in there, Yada would have been number 1, first off, but also just a lot of these characters wouldn't have made it to top 5. So I had to drop my stats from there for that reason alone. But still, Brusha being at 7, it's 7 players is just crazy to me, out of 15 games. I do think if I played more games, that number would have gone down a little bit, because a lot of them came from one specific game I had, but it's still kind of shocking to see that a lot of people are still interested in the character, so that's pretty cool. I think that also goes to show that, new characters do have pretty lasting impacts, so that's pretty cool. Coming in number 2, with also 7, and also, much to my shock, is actually Brightney at 7 players. Also very shocking to me. It's interesting because a lot of people don't think that she's a very popular character, and to see her at number 2 is pretty wild. And unlike Brusha, when it comes to these results, Brightney was actually pretty dispersed between the games, whereas I feel like with Brusha, it was very specifically 1 or 2 games. Brightney I actually had very frequently in the games, at least 1 per, what was that, 1 every other game. It really did feel like that. 1 every other game I had a Brightney. So she is actually a pretty popular character still, and that's pretty cool. I do think part of it is just because she's a pre-requirement for a character, specifically a main. Obviously that's a pretty big factor in playing a character, is if they're a prerequisite for another character to unlock, but it also just goes to show that it is an interesting character. So she is a very interesting character. She's also one of the best characters when it comes to one of the worst mechanics in the game, which is the blackout. So obviously having that boost as well is a pretty huge factor, I think, for a lot of people. I think the stealth thing, having 1 stealth also just doesn't bother that many people. Having 1 stealth sucks, obviously, especially for like distractor players, but hot take, distractor players are not as necessary as you think they are. In fact, out of this entire list, there's really only 1, and yes, they're at the number 1 spot, but bear with me here. Distractors are not that important. Extractors are. And because of that, it also means that in general, stealth is not a very important mechanic in this game. Yes, it is important, but not to the degree as extraction speed is, or like movement speed. Even that to a degree can kind of be negligible in some cases. So, it's still kind of shocking, but I think it's shocking until you think about it. Once you kind of think about it, again, just like brightening completely counters one of the worst mechanics in the game, especially for like lower end players who have like less bright devices. And in general, she's also just a decent character for some of the like more important things to be good at in the game, like extraction speed. She's a very good character. Number 1 at 8 players out of the 85 was Louis. This one doesn't shock me at all to be number 1. Really doesn't shock me. Like, the character's everywhere. He's a very fun character. He's got a very specific gimmick, but that gimmick is incredibly fun to play around with. And also just being able to also kind of be an all-rounder is very fun for the character. Because Louis is kind of one of the best all-rounder characters in the game. And I don't mean all-rounder as in like 30 stars all the way down, but as in like you can kind of do almost any role really well, but you're not like a master at any. It's literally a jack-of-all-trades character. And one thing I've really noticed is that a jack-of-all-trades character is a very preferable character. So seeing Louis up here is, again, not very shocking. I don't have as much to say about that one, so I'm just going to move on there. Next up, I also wrote down the opposite. I wrote down every character who I didn't see at all, and every character who only got played once within my 85 player basket here. So, first off, all the characters that only got played once. I have Bassie, I have Bobette, I have Ginger, I have Blot, I have Flight, Flutter, and Trimpo. I don't think it takes a lot to understand why. Most of these characters are festive characters, so obviously not as many players are going to have access to them, because not as many players will have been around during those times. So it doesn't really shock me that like a lot of the festive characters are either only played once or not played at all. And with the other character, like obviously Shrimpo's kind of a joke character, so not really surprised there. I guess like Blot and Flutter, I think, are the only two that are a little interesting in this batch. Blot, I think, is just that because it's hard to get to that point. The prerequisites to get Blot can be a bit of a drag for some people, which totally understandable, honestly. And with Flutter, I think that I love Flutter. I think Flutter's a great character, but I know that is not a popular opinion. So, when it comes to Flutter, I think it's just that Flutter unfortunately suffers from being the backup in a lot of games, right? Where you're not really good at distracting, you're not really good at extracting, so you fall into the support category. And the support category is kind of a hard category to be in this game. I will just admit that now. Unless you're in very coordinated games and coordinated runs, support really falls off in the average game, with like very few exceptions. Like one of the only support characters that I think can hold up pretty well in the average game is like Bassie, but even then she was only played once, so it kind of shows even like really strong support characters just aren't played that often. When it comes to characters not seen at all, this one actually kind of shocked me a lot more. I have Finn, Tegan, Connie, Coco, Eggson, and Rudy. Now again, 3 of these characters are festive, so those 3 kind of make sense to me. just because, again, like festive characters, and also Ison and Rudy in particular are commons, so like not as many people find that sort of interest. Totally understandable, totally get why. Coco, again, festive character, also a very hard character to get in some cases. So Coco being low and like literally not seen is not that surprising either. Connie, I think, suffers a kind of similar problem to Flutter of being very, very gimmicky and just not important in the game. She's incredibly slow. She isn't that fun to play in a lot of cases. Even in like high coordinated runs, Connie just isn't that fun to play for a lot of people. She has a very specific playstyle, and that playstyle, one, just isn't really rewarded in this game, and two, isn't really recognized in this game. So I think that really brings her down, unfortunately. So either, like, if she got a buff, I think it might help a little bit, but I just don't see it happening. So unfortunately, like, I think Connie just suffers the gimmick problem. Finn and Tegan are what really surprised me. I know I only played 15 games, and I think that is one of the biggest benefactors to why these characters are where they're at. Obviously, if I had played more games, I think a lot of these characters would have been seen more. However, not seeing these two in particular just really surprised me, just because I feel like, especially with like the buffs to Tegan and Finn just being an overall like fun character, it was kind of shocking. But I don't really know what to say in terms of why. Like, I've thought about it a lot, and I really just don't know. It could be because they're survivalists. Obviously, survivalist characters are also not really recognized as much in this game. That could be why. I really couldn't tell you. Next, I want to talk about the trinkets. I think that this section also really stood out to me, just not because of the ones that were used, because we'll get into it, but it's probably what you're thinking, but more the fact that so many weren't used. I didn't even document how many weren't used, because it was like over half the roster of like trinkets available just aren't used in the game. Number one by a landslide was obviously Vimo. It's the best in the game. Right behind that was the very classic distractor build of Shoes and Plush. Right after that, Mag PA, or Magnifying Glass and Participation Award. These were the top three almost every time. Like, those builds, or just Vimo in general, everywhere. Just very prominent. I would say if you only looked at those three alone, over half the results had one of those three, if not multiple, like, combinations of those 5 trinkets, just everywhere. But to be fair, I did record a couple others. I did see Bandana a couple times. I did see the pink bow a couple times. And I did see the vanity mirror a couple times. So I think the bandana and bow are very self-explanatory. They're one of the first ones you'll ever get. Makes sense that they're pretty frequent, just because, you know, you'll see them a lot with especially like newer players. And then mirror has become a pretty prominent one for slower characters, so kind of makes sense there as well. But the big thing that really came out for me on this is that, again, just like over half the trinkets just were not used. I really didn't see a lot of variety in trinkets. Like, there was like one game with like Clown Horn and like one game with like Party Popper, but for the most part, there wasn't a lot of variety in what was being used out here. And it really highlights one of the pain points with this game is that alone, like the fact that there's just not that much variety in the trinket department, which is one of the main things to unlock, right? So that kind of, I don't want to say like is super like devastatingly bad, but it is kind of shocking when you like really look at it. So that was kind of the results there. Average floor, was 6.69. Obviously, like, this will be a decimal, so I'm going to kind of round here, but it was 6.7, 6.698, but 6.7, so basically about halfway through floor 3, or floor 3, okay, about halfway through floor 6 is where most people got, you know, leaning towards floor 7 was the average floor for this game. Not too surprising, and obviously one of the biggest things about this one in particular, a lot of people leave the game very early on. I noticed that a lot. There was only, like, I think 2 of 15 runs that I did where I didn't have a lever within the first 3 to 4 floors. It's pretty shocking just how often people leave the game. In terms of outliers, which I basically said was anyone who doubled that amount, so anyone who got past floor 12, it was 16.5% of players, or about 14. So 14 players out of the 85 were statistically above floor 12 when they died. And I purposely spectated the whole match just to get those results. So 16.5% of players are considered, in this case for me, outliers, as someone who doubled the average amount or more. In terms of average skill, it was a pretty even too. So just to kind of give a reference, that's either they got to floor 10 or they got to like floor 5 to 10 and they were kind of knowing what they were doing, but they didn't get to floor 10. Given the average floor count, and also given the number of players who, again, left the game really early, I think that kind of skewed the number a lot. The number of players who left the game early and got zeros was 27% of players, or 23 of the 85. So a lot of people leave really, really early, and that skewed the numbers quite a bit. I had to record those as zeros. They didn't even get to, like, past floor 3. So I recorded those as zeros, and there was a lot of them that either died or left really, really early. And I think that is actually a big pain point for the game. Like, that one is actually kind of alarming. It's just how many people leave really, really early. So what you think will be an 8-person game turns out to be a 3-person game by floor 5, right? By 10 minutes in, you already lost over half your team. So that was kind of an alarming result to see 27% of the players I got were really quick to leave the game or died really early, and it really skewed that number down to the 2 when I really think it could have been higher. Last, for the average toxicity, the result I got, and again, just to make it clear, this was solely based on toxic comments, so, 1 point per toxic comment. The results was 0.143. So really, really, really low. In fact, out of all the games, I only had 2 games where toxicity occurred, and 3 total players, or 3.5% of players. Out of 85, 3 of them were even remotely toxic. And for what I put as toxic was just players who got more than 1 point. So 3 players out of an 85 player pool had enough comments to be like over 1, right? 2 or more to be considered toxic. So I think that was also really cool just to see that. For the future, I would like to definitely get more results in, not just 15. I think getting a more normalized curve will be very helpful. So I'm gonna probably, obviously not right now, just because with an event coming so soon, that's gonna skew the results a lot. But probably down the line sometime, I would like to do this again and probably get even more results and get like double the amount. Just try and get that more normalized curve in terms of results, because 15 I think was a little too low for my standards, but I kind of had to cut it short between being busy and these events coming up, which is also why I'm trying to get this out sooner than later. And also, one other thing is just kind of being a little bit more normalized in how I take the data, right? Taking it on a brand new laptop that I'm still getting used to made it a little difficult. So for the future, I'm going to try to do it on a bit more of a easy setup for me with more results to talk about once things are a little bit more calmed down from like event content and whatnot. But hopefully this was interesting. And I'm also going to leave one more thing in the description, and hopefully it's something to be intriguing. I made a survey a long time ago, basically talking about like polling people, and because I wanted to get more results out there, and I know posts on YouTube are really, really bad at hitting the public eye, but I really want to have people kind of speak their mind about the current state of the game. So I have a kind of poll. I will link it, or well, not poll, but like a form that I will link in the description. If you could fill it out, that'd be huge, because that would really, really help for future stuff I want to make in terms of the game. So I'm going to leave that in there as well. Hopefully this was interesting. Yeah.